The Sengoku Period, an epic full of irony. Part 1. Seeds of Chaos and Dawn of Ambition. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the 15th century Japan. Picture a beautiful land where cherry blossoms flourish. Poets compose verses about the moon and snow, and warriors, well, the warriors are busy turning their neighbors' backyards into battlefields. At this time, the land of the rising sun had an emperor. He was highly revered. People bowed their heads low when his name was mentioned. His portraits were hung in the most solemn places. Basically, he was a living icon, an A-list star of the entire nation. The only problem was, his actual power was probably just enough to decide whether to have fish or vegetables for dinner. All real authority, from collecting taxes to waging war, was firmly in the hands of a gentleman with a very grand title. The Shogun, or Great General who subdues the barbarians. The Shogun was like the CEO of the entire country, while the Emperor was the honorary chairman. It seemed like a stable arrangement, until the CEO also began to lose control of his employees. And our story begins on a fine day in the year 1464, when the current Shogun, Lord Ashikaga Yoshimasa, was facing a very difficult problem of the nobility. He had no son. This was a big deal. Having no heir was like building a beautiful bridge but forgetting the part that connects to the other side. After many restless nights, racking his brain and probably consulting a few fortune tellers, Shogun Yoshimasa decided, "All right, I will choose my younger brother Yoshimi as my successor. The boy looks bright, seems like he'll do a good job." The entire court breathed a sigh of relief. The problem was solved. Yoshimi, the younger brother, must have started practicing his walk to look more like a future shogun. Everything seemed to be on track. But fate, a talented screenwriter with a love for plot twists, decided to intervene. Just 1 year later, in 1465, Shogun Yoshimasa's wife suddenly gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The entire capital of Kyoto seemed to fall silent for a moment. You could hear a fly buzz by. The shogun, who had been worried about having no son, now had a headache because he had a son. He looked at the red-faced infant, then at his brother standing frozen in the corner of the room, and a classic conflict began to brew. On one side was the faction supporting the legitimate heir by blood, the newborn baby, and on the other was the faction supporting the officially appointed successor, Uncle Yoshimi. This dispute, which initially consisted of just whispers in tea rooms, quickly escalated into arguments in court, then into friendly sword fights in the streets, and finally erupted into a full-blown, decade-long civil war known by the beautiful name of the Ōnin War. This war did one thing very effectively. It turned the magnificent capital of Kyoto into a pile of rubble and shattered the already fragile authority of the shogun. Like a teacher who has lost all control of his class, the shogun could only sit and watch as his students, the local lords, daimyo, began to redraw the map of Japan to their own liking. The era of the strong devouring the weak, also known as the Sengoku Period, Warring States Period, had officially begun. And amidst that chaos, in a small land sandwiched between two formidable powers, the story of three men who would reshape the entire history of Japan is about to unfold. Let us leave the capital, engulfed in flames and smoke, and travel to Mikawa province, a land neither particularly large nor wealthy. This was the domain of the Matsudaira clan. If Japan at this time were a chessboard, the Matsudaira clan was like a pawn trembling between two giant rooks. To the west was the Oda clan of Owari province, a rising, warlike, and ambitious clan. Their lord, Oda Nobunaga, was a practical man who believed the best way to acquire more land was to ask to borrow it from a neighbor, and if they refused, to just take it for convenience. To the east was the Imagawa clan of Suruga province, an old, noble, and equally powerful clan. Their lord, Imagawa Yoshimoto, was a man of regal bearing who considered conquering other lands a refined pleasure of the aristocracy. The Matsudaira clan, under the leadership of Matsudaira Hirotada, lived in a constant state of looking over their shoulders. Every morning, Hirotada probably had to flip a coin to decide which side he should fear an attack from first. Their life was a series of stressful days, trying not to be swallowed whole in an age where the only law was the law of the jungle. And then, the day Hirotada feared most finally came. In 1548, Oda Nobunaga, feeling his domain was a bit cramped, decided to lead his army to visit the Matsudaira. This visit, of course, included swords, bows, and thunderous war cries. Hirotada, knowing his strength was like a grasshopper kicking a chariot, hastily did what any weak person would do: find a stronger protector. He turned to the east, sending a letter asking Imagawa Yoshimoto for help. The letter was likely written in the most desperate terms, to the effect of, "Great Lord Yoshimoto, my ill-tempered neighbor from the Oda clan is bullying me. Please, send troops to help and I will be eternally grateful." Yoshimoto, sitting and enjoying tea while admiring his garden, received the letter. He stroked his beard and thought. Helping the Matsudaira would create an excellent buffer zone against the Oda. This was a good opportunity. But, of course, there's no such thing as a free lunch, especially in the Sengoku period. He sent a reply. Its words elegant, but its content very clear. "Very well, Hirotada. I will help. But to guarantee your sincerity, send your 5-year-old son, Takechiyo, to my domain. The boy will be raised and educated as an honored guest." Honored guest, of course, was a polite way of saying hostage. Hirotada read the letter with a heart torn to pieces. Sending away his only son, the hope of his entire clan, was like breaking his own sword with his own hands. But what was his choice? Lose his son and keep the clan, or lose both the clan and his son? After a sleepless night, he made the most bitter decision of his life. "I agree," he wrote. And so, the young boy Matsudaira Takechiyo, only 5 years old and not yet understanding the ways of the world, had to pack his bags and leave. An entourage was dispatched to escort him to the Imagawa domain. This journey was supposed to determine his future, but no one expected it to take a completely different turn. On the way, as the group was passing through a remote area, an army suddenly burst out from the bushes. They wore armor, bearing the crest of the Oda clan. The small Matsudaira escort was quickly overwhelmed, and the boy Takechiyo, instead of becoming a hostage of the Imagawa clan, fell into the hands of his father's sworn enemy, Oda Nobunaga. Nobunaga must have laughed heartily at this bargain that had fallen from the sky. He immediately wrote a letter to Hirotada. The content was even more blunt than Yoshimoto's. "Hirotada, your son is in my hands. Immediately end your alliance with the Imagawa and switch to my side. Otherwise, prepare to receive his head." The entire Matsudaira clan was shaken. Hirotada faced an even more brutal choice than before. On one side was his son's life. On the other was the honor and survival of his clan. Any father would be heartbroken, but Hirotada, in that moment, acted like a lord of the Sengoku period. He wiped away his tears and wrote a reply. That letter has gone down in history. The life of a single son cannot compare to the loyalty and promise of an entire clan. I am willing to sacrifice my son to show the seriousness of my alliance with Yoshimoto. It was an all-in bet. A defiant declaration that he would not yield to threats. Nobuhide received the letter, perhaps with some surprise. He had expected a plea, some hesitation, but instead, he got a challenge. Killing a 5-year-old boy would bring no benefit and would only give him an evil reputation. Besides, keeping the boy alive still had value. Therefore, Nobuhide decided not to kill Takechiyo. Instead, he confined the boy to a temple called Manshoji. And so, the young boy Takechiyo began his childhood years as a hostage, living among his family's enemies, learning his first lessons about the cruelty and uncertainty of the times. 3 years passed. The life of the young hostage Takechiyo in the Oda temple was probably not too bad. He was fed, clothed, and perhaps even played with the Oda children. One of them was a strange boy, a few years older than him, named Oda Nobunaga, Nobuhide's son. This boy acted like no one else, preferring to play games with peasant children and speaking without any restraint. Perhaps it was during those days that a strange bond formed between the two children, who would later become giants of history. During those 3 years, the world changed rapidly. Takechiyo's father, Matsudaira Hirotada, passed away. His captor, Oda Nobuhide, also died suddenly from an illness. Both great clans lost their leaders. Within the Oda clan, a power struggle erupted. Nobuhide's eldest son, Nobunaga, who was supposed to be the heir, was not well liked by the retainers. They looked at this young man with apprehension. He dressed sloppily, acted bizarrely, and had none of the demeanor of a noble samurai. People called him the Fool of Owari. Meanwhile, his younger brother, Nobuyuki, was polite, refined, and a perfect model of a future lord. Most of the retainers leaned towards Nobuyuki. The Oda clan began to fracture. The Imagawa clan to the east, under the leadership of Yoshimoto, saw a golden opportunity. Their enemy was weakening itself. It was time to act. Yoshimoto sent one of his talented generals to attack an Oda fortress. During the battle, the Imagawa forces captured another of Oda Nobuhide's sons. A negotiation took place. Yoshimoto proposed, "Return the Matsudaira boy Takechiyo to me, and I will return the Oda son to you." The Oda clan, in turmoil, agreed. And so, after 3 years as a hostage of the Oda, Takechiyo was transferred. He was taken to the Imagawa domain. The boy, now about 8 or 9 years old, probably hoped he would finally return home. But no, Yoshimoto had not saved him out of kindness. Takechiyo had simply moved from one prison to another, albeit a more splendid one. He continued his life as a hostage in Sunpu, the capital of the Imagawa, for many years to come. These years in Sunpu shaped the man Takechiyo would become. He was carefully educated, learning military strategy, governance, and, most importantly, he learned patience and forbearance. He observed how Yoshimoto ran his domain, how he dealt with people. He lived as a loyal vassal, hiding all his thoughts and ambitions behind a docile exterior. It was not until he came of age that Takechiyo was allowed to return to the Matsudaira domain to inherit the leadership. But this return was not a release. He was still a puppet in Yoshimoto's hands. The Matsudaira clan had now become a loyal vassal, a steadfast outpost for the Imagawa on their western front. Takechiyo, who had spent his entire childhood in the hands of others, now had to live under the shadow of another. But deep inside, a fire still smoldered, waiting for the day to ignite. While Takechiyo was learning patience with the Imagawa, in Owari province, the fool Oda Nobunaga was facing his own challenges. As mentioned, Nobunaga was not a popular type of lord. At his father's funeral, instead of wearing formal mourning attire, he showed up in everyday clothes, casually threw incense powder at the memorial tablet, and then left. This act infuriated the senior retainers. "This is unacceptable," they whispered to each other. "How can someone like that lead the Oda clan?" They placed all their hopes on the younger brother, Nobuyuki. Nobuyuki had everything Nobunaga lacked: composure, a courteous demeanor, and respect for tradition. A civil war within the Oda clan was inevitable, but those retainers had underestimated Nobunaga. They only saw the external eccentricity and failed to see the sharp intellect and ruthlessness within. Nobunaga might act like a fool, but when necessary, he could be terrifyingly decisive and cold. In a decisive battle, Nobunaga, with a smaller force, used cunning tactics to completely defeat his younger brother's army. Nobuyuki lost the battle, but their mother intervened and pleaded for his life. Nobunaga agreed to forgive him. However, Nobuyuki did not give up. A year later, he planned another rebellion. This time, Nobunaga was no longer forgiving. He feigned illness, lured his brother to visit, and then had his men ambush and kill Nobuyuki on the spot. The fratricidal war was over. Nobunaga had eliminated all internal rivals and become the sole lord of Owari. The fool of yesterday now held absolute power. The retainers, though still doubtful, now had to bow and obey. They began to realize that behind that mad exterior was an extraordinary talent. At this time, the political situation in central Japan underwent a major shift. The three most powerful lords in the region, who had previously been constantly at war, suddenly decided to sit down and sign an alliance. They were Imagawa Yoshimoto in the east, Takeda Shingen of Kai province, known as the Tiger of Kai, and Hojo Ieyasu of the Kanto region. This triple alliance freed Yoshimoto from worries at his back. Now, he could focus his full attention westward, and the ultimate goal of every lord of that era was also Yoshimoto's goal: to march on the capital, Kyoto. Whoever controlled Kyoto controlled the shogun, and the emperor would have the legitimacy to command the entire realm. It was the biggest prize in the game. Yoshimoto, at the peak of his power, felt he was ready for that gamble. But to get to Kyoto, there was a small obstacle in the way. That was the Oda clan of Owari, led by the fool Nobunaga. To Yoshimoto, this didn't seem like a big problem. The Oda were just a newly risen clan, and Nobunaga was just an inexperienced young man. He decided he would crush the Oda on his way, like an elephant stepping on an ant. Yoshimoto gathered a massive force of about 25,000 men. To boost his prestige, he spread rumors that his army was 40,000 strong. All of central Japan trembled before the might of the Imagawa. That powerful army began its advance into Oda territory, carrying the confidence of one who was sure of victory. The news reached Nobunaga. His advisors and retainers turned pale. "My lord," they said, "our army is only about 3,000 strong. The disparity is more than 10 to 1. This is an unwinnable fight. Please surrender before it's too late." Perhaps we can save our lives." The entire castle was filled with an air of despair. Everyone believed the end of the Oda clan had come. Only one person remained calm. That was Oda Nobunaga. He listened to all the advice, then quietly gave orders to prepare. No one knew what he was thinking. Did the Fool of Owari have a plan to counter the Imagawa tsunami? Or would this be his final performance? To be continued.